Carbonyl compounds. Carbonyl group is a C double bond oxygen. That's our carbonyl group. Present in ketones, present in aldehydes, present in carboxylic acids. Okay. Present in esters. So we're going to see those a lot. Contain the carbonyl group C double bond O. That's what a carbonyl group is. Carbonyl compounds contain the carbonyl group, which is C double bonded to oxygen. Okay. Aldehydes. The form for an aldehyde is RCHO. Okay. Here's your carbonyl group, and you have an R group, a carbon on the other end, hydrocarbon, and a hydrogen on the other side of the carbonyl group. That's an aldehyde. And the reason we write it RCHO is because if we wrote it RCOH, people would think it's an alcohol. So it's written RCHO. I realize the hydrogen is not bonded between the carbon and the oxygen, but that's why we write it to distinguish it from an alcohol, because alcohols end in OH. Okay, so this is your aldehyde. One R group, one alkyl group, carbon, bonded to one hydrogen. That's an aldehyde. Okay. The R may be hydrogen, usually a carbon containing group. But if there's a hydrogen on it, it's an aldehyde. Okay, ketones. Ketones also have a carbonyl group. Okay, with a ketone, you're going to have R and R on both sides of the carbon. Now, this could be a different alkyl group, could be like R prime. It does not have to be the same. It could be the same. It could be two methyl groups, or it could be a methyl group and an ethyl group, or a methyl group and a propyl group, or whatever else you have. It could be two different groups. But there's two alkyl carbon groups bonded to both sides of the carbonyl carbon, the carbon of the carbonyl group. Okay, so an aldehyde has a hydrogen at one end of the carbon, and ketone has carbon on both sides of the carbon of the carbonyl group. So that's the difference between an aldehyde and a ketone. Okay, so R contains carbon, and structures of aldehydes and ketones. Okay. Again, this is our RCOH. That's an aldehyde. You can see the stick model of it. This is carbon, 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 and there's a hydrogen attached at the end. Okay. This is propanal. If it's an AL ending, drop the E, add AL, it's an aldehyde. We drop the E, add OH, it was an alcohol. Drop the E, add AL, it's an aldehyde. So in that example, there's 3 carbons, all single bonds to the carbon atoms. So it's propane, you drop the E. Okay, so it's propane, all single bonds, drop the E, add Al for the carbonyl group as hydrogen attached. This is our ketone. Okay, again, there's 3 carbons. Okay, there's an R group in the center, and your carbonyl group's attached here. There's an R group attached to each one. So for a ketone, it's an ONE ending. So it's propane again. It's 3 carbons, all single bonds attached to the carbon. Okay, you drop the E and add ONE for a ketone. So aldehyde, you drop the E, add Al. Ketone, you drop the E and add ONE for ketone. Okay, so if it's an Al ending, it's an aldehyde. ONE ending, it is a ketone. Okay. Genetic complexity from simple molecules. If we have anything here. Okay, so examine any cellular life form. You'll find the same basic genetic system. Okay, you have 1 or more deoxyribonucleic acid DNA molecules carry the genetic code for all the proteins needed by the cells as enzymes, which are your biological catalysts. They allow your reactions to occur. Remember, in the lab, if you want a chemical reaction to occur fast, we just heat it up. You can't do that in your body. It has to function within a very narrow range. So we have these enzymes, which are called biological catalysts. They allow reactions to occur at body temperatures without heating things up and around quickly. And every single protein in your body is coded by DNA. Every single one of them. Okay. DNA cannot read directly produce these proteins. Instead, the information is carried by DNA is copied to different RNA molecules. And we'll learn about messenger RNA, we'll learn about transfer RNA. So we go from the DNA to the RNA to make our proteins. Okay. RNA molecules work together with other molecules to produce these proteins that we need for life. Okay. So for decades, science has been trying to figure out how this amazing genetic system could have evolved from the small, simple molecules that were found in the shallow seas and atmosphere of the Earth perhaps 4 billion years ago. Okay. For the system to work, all 3 molecules are needed. DNA carries information, it stores information. RNA interprets it, and then after it interprets it, the proteins are formed by the transfer RNA. Okay. Back in 1980, they suggested an answer. It was discovered that some RNA molecules could act as a biological catalyst. Okay. RNA molecules can do 2 jobs, carry genetic information and catalyze chemical reactions. There's actually a second function RNA molecules could accomplish. So a hypothesis was developed that RNA was the first biological molecule and that our genetic system evolved from RNA. And we evolved into more complex DNA and different segregation of functions. Okay. In the 1960s, 2 components of RNA, adenine and guanine. Okay, those are bases of the nucleotides that make up RNA and DNA. Were synthesized in the laboratory from simple molecules and energy source, like lightning strikes. Okay, so basically they created the components of life in a test tube. Okay, from simple molecules and an energy source. In 1995, researchers discovered that by adding the carbonyl group we talked about, remember the carbonyl group is our aldehyde and our ketones. Okay, so by adding the carbonyl group containing molecule, urea, which is our for the body by urine, we excrete from the body, to the mixture, they can make large amounts of 2 other components of RNA, uracil and cytosine. Those are the 2 other nucleotides that we use to make up RNA. Okay, so now we can produce adenine and guanine, and with the addition of carbonyl groups which are present, we can produce uracil and cytosine. Those are the 4 base nucleotides that make up RNA. And now we can reproduce that in a laboratory experiment, in a laboratory container. The remaining requirements for RNA molecules are phosphate groups and the sugar ribose. That's what it attaches to. Okay, phosphate would have been readily available. Ribose, it turns out, could be produced from the simplest aldehyde, formaldehyde. The simplest aldehyde. Remember what an aldehyde looks like. So the simplest aldehyde you can form is C double bond O with an H and an H. That's the simplest aldehyde that's possible. Other than that, we start adding carbons to it. And that's formaldehyde. Okay, the IUPAC name for that would be 1 carbon, and it's an aldehyde, so Al ending. So that is methanal. Okay, so you take methane, because it's only 1 carbon, drop the E, and add Al. So methanal, better known as formaldehyde. And formaldehyde, you can make the sugar ribose. This carbonyl group, being able to reduce it, you can oxidize it to make carboxylic acid, you can reduce it to make alcohols. It's very powerful and it can form a lot of compounds once that carbonyl group is in there. Okay, and this is formaldehyde or methanal. Okay, that's the simplest aldehyde possible. Okay, formaldehyde would have been found in the shallow seas. We can find it today in comets, and many comets struck the early Earth at that time. Okay. So in the laboratory, under conditions designed to imitate those on Earth 4 billion years ago, formaldehyde molecules form chains, and these chains make it into ribose, which is a sugar that is needed for DNA and RNA. Okay, the chains twist into cyclical ring structures, including the sugar ribose. And RNA is ribonucleic acid. We use the sugar ribose as the backbone. So these experiments suggest that all the precursors needed to make RNA could have formed spontaneously and thus and RNA may have been the information carrying molecule from which our entire genetic system evolved, because we can form that at the very beginning of life. Okay. But other researchers argue that RNA is too fragile to survive the conditions on early Earth. Okay. So in aldehydes, the carbonyl group is always located at the end of the carbon chain. Okay. Remember, aldehydes have a hydrogen attached to it. Hydrogens are terminal. Once there's a hydrogen, just like any Lewis structure we draw, the molecule terminates, it ends, it can't keep going. In other words, if you have an aldehyde, we have a carbon attached to a carbon, attached to a carbon, attached to a hydrogen here, and our carbonyl group. Once you hit hydrogen, the chain stops. Hydrogen is terminal. Okay, you cannot add another bond to hydrogen here. Hydrogen only have one bond. Remember the sp-df orbitals? The s orbital hydrogen only has an s orbital, and that's filled. So hydrogen cannot have any more than one bond, so it's terminal. Okay, so in an aldehyde, carbon number 1 is always at the end of the molecule. Okay, if you have an aldehyde, it cannot be at the second carbon or the third carbon. It has to be at the number 1 carbon because it ends. There's a hydrogen at the end of the chain. Okay, so in aldehydes, the carbonyl group is always, and very few times in chemistry do I say always. In fact, hardly ever do I say always. But in aldehydes, the carbonyl group is always located at the end of the carbon chain because hydrogen is terminal. You can't add anything else after that. Now in ketones, the carbonyl group is located within the carbon chain. It can't be at the number 1 position. And it can't be at the other end of it either. You have to have 2 carbons between it. So if you have to have 2 carbons or more, carbon, 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 that's not, hold on, let me make it a little neater. Okay, carbon, 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 carbon. Okay, this carbonyl group has to be in the middle of the chain. It cannot be at the number 1 position, no matter what. If it's at the number 1 position, it's an aldehyde. Okay, it has to have between carbon chains because there's carbon on both sides of the carbonyl group. Okay, and when we're naming these things, this should not surprise you. We give the lowest number, the lowest number to the carbonyl carbon. Our functional group always gets the lowest number. Okay, so far so good. All right, so aldehyde, hydrogen is terminal, carbon is always at the end. Ketone, carbon is always between 2 carbons. If you have a ketone, it can never be 1 hexanone. That's impossible. Can't have that. Okay, it always has to be between, it has to be a number 2 or higher. Cannot be at the end. If it's at the end, it's an aldehyde. Okay, carboxylic acid is a carbonyl group here with an alkyl group added to it. Again, we'll get into those also. Those also have carbonyl groups. And this is also going to be at the end, the lowest possible number. Again, because once it hits this hydrogen here, you're going to terminate. Okay. Amides. Okay, this is our structure for amino acids, which we're going to talk about in depth when we get into biochemistry. This is a carbonyl group, and it's bonded to a nitrogen. Okay, this is a peptide bond. This is what holds amino acids together in proteins, this bond here. But again, it's a carbonyl group. This carbonyl group we're going to use a lot throughout the rest of this course. So get used to it. All right, the carbonyl group is a carbon double bond oxygen, and depending what's attached to it at each end, depending what functional group it is, whether it's an aldehyde, a ketone, a carboxylic acid, an amide. Okay, so structures and physical properties. Okay, aldehydes and ketones are polar compounds. If you look at the carbonyl bond, the C double bonded to oxygen. Oxygen is more electronegative than carbon, just like in alcohols. So this is going to pull the electrons towards it. Electrons are negative. So you get a minus, delta minus, and a delta plus at the carbon side. So they're going to be polar compounds. Now, do you have hydrogen bonding with carbonyl groups? Someone say no. because there's no hydrogen attached to the oxygen. The hydrogens are attached to the carbons. Remember, for hydrogen bonding to occur, you have to have the hydrogen directly attached to the oxygen. Okay, and there's no hydrogen directly attached to that oxygen. So aldehydes and ketones, carbonyl groups, do not have hydrogen bonding on the carbonyl carbon, on the carbonyl group. There could be other things attached to it. It's an alcohol group later on or something like that. Then you'd have hydrogen bonding. But on the carbonyl oxygen, there is no hydrogen attached. No hydrogen bonding occurs in aldehydes or ketones. But you have a polar bond. So very low molecular weight aldehydes or ketones are going to be polar because you have some polarity. The carbonyl group is polar. Oxygen is more electronegative than carbon and attracts the electrons, creating a polar bond. Okay, so the oxygen end is electronegative, and you get this small positive charge, small negative charge, because the oxygen and the electron. Remember, bonds are just made of electrons. 2 electrons in every line here, every bond. So oxygen pulls these electrons towards it in the bond. And electrons have a negative value. Protons are positive, neutrons are neutral, electrons are negative. So it pulls negative charges towards itself. So it becomes more negative than the carbon. And that's all it is. That's what creates a polar bond in a carbonyl group. Okay, it cannot form intermolecular hydrogen bonding between ketones or aldehydes, but it will form dipole-dipole attractions. Okay, it can't be hydrogen bonding because there's no hydrogen. No hydrogen attached to this oxygen here. Okay, so you cannot have hydrogen bonding. You can have dipole-dipole attraction. In other words, if you have a, let's do line structures. Okay, say I have a ketone here. This is going to be delta minus. This is going to be delta plus. Okay, so now we can have this line up here, delta minus, delta plus. Let me get rid of those for a second. I got to make it bigger. I'm not a great artist here. Let me make it bigger here. No, let's just, oh, it's all going away. All right, let's try that again. I'm gonna make these a little bit larger. Okay, a line structure. Here's our ketone, right? The oxygen is gonna be delta minus. The carbon is gonna be delta plus. It's gonna be a little bit of a polar bond. Okay, so if you have another ketone, okay, and we line it up here, delta minus, delta plus. You have an attraction here. That's a dipole-dipole attraction. A minus opposite charges attract. And you have those small charges set up because of the dipole, and you get what's called dipole-dipole attraction, which is just the attraction of opposite charges attracting each other. And that's what helps hold this together. This is your polar compound. This gives you a slightly higher melting point or boiling point than just a regular hydrocarbon, because you do have some attraction between those charges because it is polar. Okay, but that's what's meant by dipole-dipole attraction. You have a dipole set up here, a dipole set up here, and the charge of the opposite charge of the dipole attract one another. Okay. Can form hydrogen bonds with water. Now, if you have water in the compound, okay, remember water has HOH, right? This is delta minus, this is delta plus. So now this minus charge can attract that hydrogen, and that's a hydrogen bond because you have hydrogen attached to an oxygen. So water can form hydrogen bonds with carbonyl groups. Carbonyl groups alone cannot form hydrogen bonds. With water, because they're polar, they can form a hydrogen bond because the water has the H directly connected to the oxygen. Okay, and that is kind of crowded here. Let's get some of this off the screen again. See if I can get some of that out of the way. There we go. So we can see this a little bit better. So here's your hydrogen. Oh, it is going to take some of that off there. Good. All right, perfect. All right, so you can have a hydrogen bond if it's mixed with water. Okay, because here's your carbonyl group. Remember, this is delta minus because it's pulling electrons. This is delta plus. Okay, water is delta minus, delta plus. Okay, The plus and the minus charges attract one another. That's a hydrogen bond because a hydrogen is directly attached to the oxygen of the water molecule. So when mixed with water, the carbonyl groups can form a hydrogen bond with water. So that's why it dissolves in water. Ketones and aldehydes dissolve in water. Okay. If it's just the ketone or the aldehyde, you will not have hydrogen bonding. Okay, because there are no hydrogens bonded directly to oxygen. All right. So aldehydes and ketones are polar compounds, just like we talked about. The carbonyl group is polar because of the difference in electronegativity. Oxygen end is more electronegative than the carbon end. Okay. This is a much better picture than the one I drew. So you can see the negative and positive charge attracting each other, negative, positive charge attracting each other. That's your dipole-dipole interaction. Those are two dipoles attracting each other because of the different charges. That's how it sticks together. Okay, that's what increases the boiling point or melting point of compounds with carbonyl groups. Okay, so hydrogen bonding in carbonyl groups occurs with water. And again, you can see the diagrams laid out there. Those a little bit better picture than I can draw. Okay, so in A, you have hydrogen bonding. You have the oxygen being attracted to that positive group. You have the positive part being attracted to the oxygen group. Again, you can see where it's being attracted to the water molecule, so it dissolves in water. Okay, in B, okay, do we have any hydrogen bonding in B?
No.
Perfect. Okay, you don't because there's no hydrogens. There's no hydrogens attached to the oxygen molecules. Okay, you have dipole-dipole interactions, but you have no hydrogen bondings. Hydrogen bonding is a very strong form of dipole-dipole interaction. It's a specific type. Okay, they're both dipole-dipole interactions, but hydrogen bonding is a lot stronger. Make sense? Yes, thumbs up, some.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks. All right, so you have bonding with water. Like I said, hydrogen bonding with water and intermolecular dipole-dipole attractions. That's the difference. All right, so physical properties are determined by that interaction. So carbonyl groups, anything like aldehydes and ketones, boil at higher temperatures than hydrocarbons. Same, we're calling them similar molecular weights, similar sizes. Hydrogens have no oxygen at all. Okay, so there is no interaction. There is no dipole-dipole interaction. So that nothing holds them together. So they're going to have higher temperatures, boiling points, and melting points than hydrocarbons. Then ethers. Remember, ethers are R-O-R. Again, the carbonyl group has electrons pushed out on the outside, so you can get away with it. Here, the oxygen's pulling from here. It's less of a charge than the double bond. Okay? The double bond creates a much stronger charge, much stronger dipole. Because you have more electrons that are being pulled towards oxygen. So it's going to be higher melting point and boiling points than hydrocarbons, higher melting boiling points than ethers. Okay, lower temperatures then. So these things have higher boiling points. We talked about water, like alcohols. Okay, alcohols. Alcohol has that OH group. OH has hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding is a very, very strong dipole-dipole interaction. So anything with hydrogen bonding is going to have higher boiling points. So it's going to boil at a lower temperature. Okay, it's going to have a higher boiling point if there's hydrogen bonding. Okay, there's your hydrogen bonding. Again, I wrote directly over it. Okay, so this is your carbonyl group. This is your dipole-dipole bonding. Okay, so if you look at different structures, here's your hydrocarbon. These are all molecular weights very similar, 58, 60, and so on. So they're all the same size. So there's butane, no oxygens, that's its boiling point. Now, you add one oxygen in the center, that's an ether, that's methoxyethane. Okay, you add an ether, okay? Now, because it's a little bit more than the hydrocarbon. You add an alcohol, okay? it's a lot higher boiling point. They didn't put these in order, did they? No, 97.2. And the aldehyde and the ketone. Aldehyde and ketones are very similar. This ketone is going to have a little more. It's going to be 56, 49. Okay, the carbonyl group makes it a little higher. So this would be the lowest. That'd be 1. Then you'd have the ether. Okay. Then you'd have your aldehydes and ketones. And again, the 3 and 4. And then the highest would be your alcohol here in this picture. I wouldn't make you distinguish between aldehydes and ketones because that you'd have to look up because some aldehydes are higher than some ketones. Again, it's just a carbonyl group. So if you have a carbonyl group, they're going to be, the point is on your exams, you have to be able to distinguish between carbonyl groups are going to be higher than hydrocarbons and higher than ethers. They're going to be lower than alcohols. That's the one you learn from this. Because alcohols, because there's no dipole-dipole interaction here. There's very, very little here. There's some here, and there's very strong in the alcohol because of hydrogen bonding. Okay. So aldehydes and ketones form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. Okay, remember, water has hydrogen tied to the oxygen, so now there's a dipole there. Now you can have hydrogen bonding because of the water. Okay. As a result, the smaller members of the two families, 5 or fewer carbons. So the smaller aldehydes and ketones are going to be soluble in water. Okay, once you get larger ones, the hydrocarbon chains take over and it just becomes non-soluble because hydrocarbons are non-soluble. But if you got that carbonyl group, the relatively small aldehydes or ketones are going to be water soluble because of the hydrogen bonding with water. As the carbon length increases, like we talked about, the compounds become less polar and more hydrocarbon-like, more non-polar. The larger ones are soluble in non-polar organic solvents, like octane or hexane. Okay? Remember the rule, like dissolves like. Polar dissolves polar, non-polar dissolves non-polar. Okay, so as these aldehydes and ketones get larger and larger, they become more like non-polar compounds and dissolve in non-polar solvents. Okay. Which member needs the following group to be more soluble in water? Well, first one or the second one? Which one's going to be more soluble in water? Number 1 or number 2?
2.
Number 2, perfect. This is going to be soluble in water because it has a carbonyl group. It has a charge, making it polar. Delta plus, delta minus, and then you form hydrogen bonds with water. Okay. That would be more soluble in water. Okay, of these two, which one is more soluble in water? A, let's do A and B this time instead of 1 and 2, just for, so it's different. All right, which is more soluble, A or B in water?
B.
B, perfect. B has hydrogen bonding on its own too, because there's a hydrogen attached to oxygen. So alcohols are always more soluble than ketones or aldehydes. Because again, this is going to have hydrogen bonding. Okay. So you have hydrogen bonding here and hydrogen bonding on the water molecules. So it's going to be much more soluble. So B is going to be more soluble. So ketones or aldehydes are more soluble than hydrocarbons. Alcohols are more soluble than ketones or aldehydes. Okay. Which member was going to be more soluble in water? Take a look at those. Either A or B. Which is going to be more soluble in water?
B.
B, perfect. Okay, these are going to be more soluble in water because of this carbonyl group, because there's a charge on it. Anytime you create a charge, a small minus, small plus, now it's going to dissolve in water as long as this is small enough here. It's starting to get pretty big, but it's still small to dissolve in water. But much more than this one here, because there's no oxygen group, there's no charge on the this is just all hydrocarbons here. So there's no charge on that at all. So B is going to be much more soluble than methylcyclopentane. Okay. Let's take C and D. Look at C and D. Which is more soluble between those two?
C.
Which one?
I think C is.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. C, much more soluble. You got two OH group, two hydrogen bonds here, very highly polar. So you have two carbonyl groups, which is polar, but not near as polar as with the hydrogen bonding. So C is going to be a lot more soluble in water because it's more polar. Okay. Okay, higher boiling points now, not solubility. Now we're going with higher boiling points. And it's the same principle, actually. So which one's going to have a higher boiling point? Either 1 or 2. It sounds like an eye doctor. 1 or 2. 1 or 2, A or B. All right, looking at those two compounds, which is going to have a higher boiling point? Which one's going to be held together tighter?
1.
Number 1, perfect. Number 1, because there is the carbonyl group and the carbonyl group. And besides that, now you get an OH group on top of that. That OH group is going to cause hydrogen bonding, and it's going to have a higher boiling point because it'll hold this thing together with stronger intermolecular forces. Okay, let's do and 1 or 3, just to be different. Okay, look at the compounds, similar molecular weights. Is 1 or 3 going to be higher higher bonding points?
1.
1, perfect. Same reason. Okay, you got your carbonyl group, which is going to have some polarity. On this one, you have an OH group. This one, you have another alkyl group, carbon group, which is nonpolar. So this is going to provide a lot more hydrogen bonding, a lot stronger dipole-dipole interaction, and it's going to make the boiling point a lot higher. Okay, let's do one more, then we'll take a break here. Okay, which member would have a higher boiling point? Either 5 or 6. What's going to have a higher boiling point? Same rules, same reasons here.
5.
5, perfect. Okay, you have a carbonyl group here, but you got an OH group here. Okay, OH group gives you hydrogen bonding. Carbonyl group does not. It gives you dipole-dipole interaction, but the OH group gives you a very strong hydrogen bond. Okay, so that one's gonna have a higher boiling point. And one more here, then we'll take a break. This one here, someone named this compound real quick. This is A, this is B. What's the name number of A?
Octane.
Octane, perfect. 8 carbons, all single bonds. Octane, okay? So A or B, which one's going to have the higher boiling point or melting point? Either both be the same.
B.
Which one? I didn't hear it.
B.
B, perfect. You're right, absolutely right. Because you have a carbonyl group. Here you have nothing. You have all hydrocarbon. So B is going to have a higher boiling point because there's a dipole-dipole interaction holding it together more than the hydrocarbon. Nomenclature. How do we name these things? Both IUPAC names and common names. Okay, so naming aldehydes. Remember aldehydes, we drop the E, add AL. We locate the parent compound, the longest carbon chain. That's your parent compound, the longest continuous carbon chain. And it must contain the carbonyl group. You can't have a chain that doesn't have the carbonyl group on it, even if it's shorter. You have the longest continuous chain that contains or includes the carbonyl group. Replace the E, so drop the E and add AL. That's an aldehyde. Number of the chain with the carbonyl carbon is number 1. Remember, carbonyl carbon on an aldehyde is always at the end. It always has a hydrogen. So the carbonyl carbon is, for an aldehyde, is always going to be the number 1 carbon in the chain. Number and name all the substituents, just like we normally do. Okay, so here we have our aldehyde. We have one carbon is methane. We drop the E and add Al. So methanal, which is also called formaldehyde. Okay. Ethanol. We have two carbons. This is a number 1 carbon, number 2 carbon. It includes the carbonyl group. Ethane is 2 carbons. Drop the E, add Al, ethanol. 3 carbons. Again, this is always your number 1 carbon. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it's propane, all single bonds, 3 carbons. Drop the E, add Al, propanal. All right, so let's name this thing. Longest carbon chain. Are we going to number this carbon chain from right to left or left to right? Which way?
Right to left.
Right
Right
to
to
left.
left.
It's going to go this way because the carbonyl carbon always has to be number 1. 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 carbons is pentane. Okay, and we have a methyl group attached at number 4. So what's the name of this thing going to be? Four methyl. Then what do we call this? The whole structure here with the carbonyl group. Remember, we drop the E and add what? Al, right? So 4 methyl pentan al. So what's the name of this thing? Parent chain is 5 carbons, pentanal, right to left, 4 methyl group, and 4 methyl pentanal. Okay. Why do we not call it 4 methyl 1 pentanal?
Because the carbonyl group is always going to be number 1. So we
You got it.
assume.
Perfect. Exactly right. The carbonyl group always has to be number 1 on an aldehyde. You never put the 1. So it's 4 methyl pentanal. Because you see it's an aldehyde with that Al ending, you know that carbonyl carbon is going to be number 1. Okay, so many years scientists puzzled what compounds give the nutty flavor to expensive aged cheddar cheese. Okay, in 2004, Dr. Mary Ann Drake of North Carolina State University solved it. She identified a group of aldehydes that impart this nutty flavor to cheeses. Use the IUPAC nomenclature to name 2 of the aldehydes shown below that she discovered gave that chase. So, first of all, there are 2 aldehydes because there's a hydrogen attached to the carbonyl group, which makes them aldehydes. And let's name the one on the left first. Okay, so how many carbons in our longest chain? There's 3, right? 3 carbons is propane. And it's an aldehyde. You drop the E, add Al. And then at the number 2 carbon, because this is number 1, this is number 2, there is a methyl group. So 2 methyl propanal. Okay, 2 methyl propanal. Okay, tells you everything you need to write in the name there. There's an Al ending, which means aldehyde. Propane means 3 carbons. An means all single bonds. Oh, why can't I? Oh, I hit the wrong button. That's why. All single bonds. And there's a methyl group at the number 2 carbon. Look at the next one. How many carbons in the longest chain there? Anybody want to count them?
4. 4.
Perfect. Okay, so 4 carbons is butane. It's an aldehyde because there's a carbonyl group with a hydrogen attached. It's an aldehyde. Drop the E, add Al, butanal. Okay, and then at number 1, 2, 3, at number 3, there's a methyl group. So we got 3 methyl. So put it together. We got 3 methyl butanal. Okay. Those are 2 aldehydes right there. Okay. Many molecules can produce complex flavors of olive oils. Among these are hexanal and trans-2-hexanal. Okay. Which have flavors described as green. Where are we at? Green grassy and green bitter, respectively. Draw the structure of these 2 compounds. Draw both the structure formulas and the line formulas. Cool. So we got 2 compounds to draw. Hexanal and trans-2-hexanal. Now, why is there, I just got done telling you the AL group is at number 1. Why is there 2 in this right here? Anybody see why?
Double bond.
Perfect. Perfect. Hexene, E-N-E. This tells you where the double bond is. Does not tell you where the aldehyde group is. You know where the aldehyde group is. It's at number 1. That 2 refers to the double bond. There's an E-N-E in there. Remember, A-N is single bonds, E-N is double bonds, Y-N is triple bonds. So that's an ene. So that 2 tells you where the double bond is located, not where the aldehyde group is located. We know where that's located. Perfect. Very good. So let's make hexanol. Hexanol is 6 carbons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. Okay. And on the end, there is a aldehyde group. So let's do it here. So I have room. Double bond O. And usually I'll put an H right here just to make it look right. You don't have to put the H, but I usually do just because it's an aldehyde group and it stands out. Okay, because you don't normally include H's in line drawings. So the structure drawing would be 1, well, CH3, CH2, how many times? 1, 2, 3, 4 times. C, double bond O, bond to H. That's the structural formula. Okay, that's a 4 right there. It's hard to tell. Okay, let's see if it pops up for us. So hexanal is going to be, do you have the line? And there's the line drawing. Okay, so there's your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. And there's your aldehyde. Okay, and this is the line formula. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's hexanol. And the next one, okay, so that's how we draw it from the IUPAC name. The next one is trans-2-hexenal. Okay, so trans-2-hexenal. So again, you got 6 carbons. So let's put in 6 carbons, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it says there's an aldehyde, double bond O, bond to H. And there's at number 2, there's a double bond. And we have to show it in the transposition. Okay. So let's make our line drawing would be 1, 2, and we have a double bond of the number 2 carbon. And we're going to need to go trans 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's our aldehyde group. 1, 2, and our bond. And that's trans. You can see both sides of double bond. If it was cis, I would swing this over here to this side. Okay, so there's, whoops. There's trans 2-hexanol. Now do the structural formula. You got CH3, CH2, CH2, bonded to carbon, bonded to hydrogen, double bond, C, and this is going to be trans. So C, double bond O, bonded to H, bonded to H. There's your structural formula. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. Okay, double bonds at number 2, carbonyl groups at number 1, and they're in the trans position. Okay. Now, if this was cis, now the only thing tricky about this, this is easy for you to understand. The line structure would go like this. If that was a cis double bond. This is a trans double bond. This is a cis double bond. Okay. You see how it goes same side double bond or opposite sides of the double bond. So the line structure is taking on a little different shape when it becomes a cis double bond, because they have to be on the same side of the double bond. There's one too many lines there. Whoa, that really got disappeared. All right. So here's your structural formula. Again, get some of this out of the way here. So there's your alkyl group. Okay, your double bond and your aldehyde. Okay, double bonds at number 2. Your aldehyde is always at number 1, and it's in the trans position. Okay, and there's your line formula. That number 1, number 2, etc. So 2 is your double bond, 1 is your aldehyde. So now you can name it, and then you can, from the name, you can draw the structure. Cis 2 hexanol. Okay, exact opposite of what we just did. Okay, so the cis would be same side. Alkyl groups would be on the same side now. So we just rotated where the hydrogen was and where that aldehyde group was. That's cis 2 hexanol. Okay, same compound, just in a cis relationship. And when we do the line structure, okay, 1, 2, 3, and again, you can see this is a cis relationship. Both these here are on the same side of the double bond. Okay, so that's how you draw a line structure with cis and trans. Remember, trans, we just put a branch straight up. With a cis, you make a straight line and you bring it down across. You could bring it up for trans or down for cis. So these carbon groups, this one here and this one here, are on the same side of the double bond. So that's cis 2 hexanol structure formula, line formula. Another aldehyde associated with any flavored cheddar cheese is 2-methylbutanol. Draw the structure and condensed structural formula for this molecule. Okay, so 2-methylbutanol. Butanol has 4 carbons. So you're going to draw 4 carbons. Okay. And it's an Al ending, so butanal. Okay, that's an aldehyde. And 2-methyl group, CH3. So this is CH3, CH2, CH, COOH. That's your structure formula. Okay, so here's your structure formula. This is number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Number 1 is your carbonyl group. Number 2 is your methyl group. So 2-methylbutanol. Okay, and the condensed formula, just push all that together. You draw your, remember your CHO. Remember, we don't put COH because that would look like an alcohol. We put CHO. We just switch them around. So we know we're referring to an aldehyde. So here's your CH3 group. Here's your CH2 group. Here's your CH group, which is right here. And then this methyl group in parentheses refers back to the previous carbon. Remember, when we put parentheses, It always goes back to that carbon. So the CH3 group is attached to this carbon, and then our CHO. Okay. Just don't make the mistake of putting COH, because COH is an alcohol. So it's an aldehyde. We put CHO, even though we know the hydrogen is not between the carbon and the oxygen. Okay, but that's your condensed structural formula. Okay, common names. That's if you're not going to use the IPAC, you have some common names pertaining from the Latin roots, as are the first 5 carboxylic acids. Okay, so Greek letters used to indicate the position of the substituents, with the carbon groups adjacent or bonded to the carbonyl group being the alpha carbon. So instead of number 1, these are alpha. So you might see them with alpha in the number 1 position. Okay, so this is your aldehyde. Okay, the first carbon past the carbonyl carbon is alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Okay, they just use the Greek letters, okay, to indicate the position of the carbon atom. Sometimes you'll see alpha instead of one carbon, with like say 3-methyl, you'll see beta methyl. Okay, it was just alpha, beta, gamma, delta. It's just your alphabet of Greek letters that are used to indicate which carbon. And the thing is, alpha is not your number 1 carbon. Alpha is your number 2 carbon. Because when you're using Greek letters, you start with the carbon past the carbonyl group. Okay, you don't put a letter associated with the carbon of the carbonyl group. Okay, so here's your different common names that you might run into. But methanol, these are the ones I want you to know, the IUPAC names. I'm not going to quiz you on common names. Methanol is formaldehyde, and it's 2 hydrogens. Ethanol, 2 carbons. Propanol, 3 carbons. Butanol, 4 carbons. Pentanol, 5 carbons. And pentanol is valdealdehyde, butyraldehyde, propanaldehyde, or acetaldehyde, or formaldehyde. Again, those are just the common names for it. Okay, so there's one of your aldehyde groups there. Okay, and instead of having the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you had alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Okay, so this is 2-methyl pentanol, because again, if you did the nomenclature, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So 2-methyl pentanol, okay? Or the common name is alpha, okay, methyl, because there's a methyl group on the second carbon. So alpha methyl valdealdehyde. Valdealdehyde is pentanol. Like I said, I'm not gonna quiz you on the common name. You won't see that on the midterm. Okay, but you might see it in research articles, things like that. Again, so what's the IUPAC name of this one? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons. So this is beta methyl valdealdehyde, or 3-methyl pentanol. So 3-methyl pentanol or beta methyl valdealdehyde. Again, the thing with the Greek letters, just realize they don't start on the carbonyl carbon. They start on the carbon adjacent to it. So this is your alpha carbon, beta, gamma, and delta. Okay, name this thing. Let's use an IUPAC name. 5 carbons. Always number 1. So number 4, we have a chloral group. So we have 4 chloral. And then how many carbons do you have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pentan, instead of the pentane E, drop the E, add Al for your aldehyde. That's it. 4 chloral pentanol. Okay, so 4 chloropentanol. If you did the other way, this would be alpha, beta, gamma. That's not a gamma. Gamma, delta. Okay, so this would be gamma chloral valdealdehyde, which is pentanol. Okay. The only thing I want you to know with the Greek letters is it starts on the one adjacent to the carbonyl carbon, not on the carbonyl carbon. So alpha is not number 1. Name the aldehyde represented by the following structural condensed formulas. Okay, so name this thing. This is going to be, we're going to number our carbons. We'll always give the aldehyde, the carbonyl carbon, the number one number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we got 5 carbons, which is pentane, all single bonds. So this is pentane. We drop the E, add Al. And at number 4, we have a bromine group. So 4 bromo pentan Al. 4 bromo pentanal. Break the name down, double check, always double check your work we do in the exam. Al is your aldehyde, which is right here. An is your single bonds in the compound. Pent means 5. There's 5 carbons across. And there's a bromo group, which is bromine at number 4. It's very easy to double check organic chemistry. Just go back and look at it after breaking down the name in all the different sections. Okay, and then we got this thing. This is, again, number 1 carbon is always at the carbonyl carbon. Number 2, number 3, and number 4. So we got 4 carbons. 4 carbons is butane. Drop the E, add Al because it's an aldehyde. And at 3, we have a methyl group. Put it together, we have 3 methyl butan al. Oops, what happened? There it is. Got right by his, I must have double clicked it. 3 methyl butanal. Okay. Nothing new or earth shattering here. It's the same kind of nomenclature we've been doing. The only difference is the alpha, beta, gamma, delta system. Okay. That's the only difference we have so far with naming this versus everything else we've been doing. IUPAC nomenclature, name each of the following compounds. Okay. There we go. So again, what's your longest carbon chain? How many? Someone count those. What's your
5.
longest? 5. Perfect. And 5 is pentane. Okay. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we got what? What attachments do we have to this chain?
Methyl.
Methyl groups, right? At what numbers?
3 and 4.
3 and 4. So we have 3, 4 di methyl. And that's it. So we put together, we take the drop the E, add Al because it's an aldehyde. So we have 3, 4 dimethyl pentanal. Remember, commas between numbers, dashes between numbers and letters. So 3, 4 dimethyl pentanal. Okay. And this one, longest carbon chain. Is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because he went the other way, we 1, 2, 3, 4 going downwards. So 5 is the longest chain. 5 is pentane, just like before, pentanal. And we have an attachment group at number 2. What's the attachment group that we have in this compound?
Ethyl.
Ethyl, perfect. And it's at number 2. So you have 2 ethyl. And we have an aldehyde, 5 carbons, so pentane. It's 5 carbons, all single bonds. Drop the E, add Al. So 2 ethyl pentanal. And there we go, 2 ethyl pentanal. And number 2 is an ethyl group, 5 carbon, all single bonds, Al aldehyde at the end. And that's how we name them. Okay, let's name this one. Again, there's 3 carbons. So 3 carbons is propane. Okay. And at number 2, there's a chlorine attached. So 2 chloro. And this is an aldehyde. Aldehyde means you drop the E and add Al. So put it together. 2 chloro propane al. Okay. And this one. Now, you got a little bit of a problem here. We have 2 functional groups. How do we know which one to name? The rule is you name the most oxidized functional group. Which is more oxidized? OH group, alcohol, or the carbonyl group? Which one has more bonds between the carbon and the oxygen? The carbonyl group. That's the most oxidized portion. So you're going to name the aldehyde. When OH is a substituent, when it's a functional group, it's named an OL ending. You can only have one functional group in the ending. There's only one end of a name. This is called hydroxy. Okay. If the OH group is a substituent, it's hydroxy. If it's the functional group, it's an OL ending. Okay. Just like the phenol group. Phenol is an OH with a benzene ring. Phenol with a YL is your substituent or your attachment. So when OH is attachment, it's called hydroxy. Okay. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons. Okay. So it's butane. Put it right up in here, butane. And at number 3, there is a hydroxy group. Okay, so it's an aldehyde. So drop the E, add Al. So it's 3 hydroxy butanal. Okay, this is a old way of doing it. It's with 3 OL group, but it's 3 hydroxy butanal. Okay, remember the OL just stood for alcohol, but when it says here, it's called a hydroxy group. So that the number 3 position is hydroxy, so 3 hydroxy butanal. Examples of ketones. Okay, any questions on aldehydes? We know how to name them. We know IUPAC names, we know common names. The common names, don't fret. The only thing I want you to know on common names are alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, the Greek letters. They don't start on the carbonyl carbon. They start on the carbon adjacent to it. That's what I want you to know about the common names. That's it. In aldehydes, you drop the E, add Al. Okay? And they're always at the end. Aldehydes are always number 1. Ketones can never be number 1. You're gonna have to give you a number with ketones, except in a couple instances, like propanone. There's only one place you can put a ketone, so you don't need a number for that one. But most of the time, you have to put a number on your ketones so I can tell where the carbonyl group is. A ketone is a carbonyl group, just like we've been doing before, except now it does not have a hydrogen on the end. It has an R group on both ends, 2 carbon atoms. It's between 2 carbon atoms, the carbonyl group. So the simplest ketone you can have has to have 3 carbons. If it has 1 carbon, it's going to be an aldehyde. If it has 2 carbons, it's going to be an aldehyde because the carbonyl group is going to be on the end. Okay, so the simplest ketone has to have 3 carbons. So the carbonyl group is interior between 2 carbons. Okay, the longest chain that includes a carbonyl group, just same as aldehydes. Okay, replace the E, drop the E, and add, instead of Al, it's ONE. So we're dropping the E and adding ONE for a ketone. So once you see the ending Al, you know it's an aldehyde. Once you see the ending ONE, you know it's a ketone. Indicate the position of the ketone by the number. Okay. The CO group, the carbonyl group, has the lowest possible number, just like always. Not change any of the rules here. So this is the simplest ketone you can have. 3 carbons. 1, 2, 3. And the name of this thing is 3 carbons is propane. Drop the E, add O-N-E. So propanone. Now, why do I not have to put 2 propanone? Can someone tell me? Well, you could put 2 propanone, or you just put propanone. Why do I not need the 2 on this ketone?
It can only go in one place.
Perfect. Exactly. It can only be in one place. If it's on 1 or 3, it's an aldehyde because at the end. So it has to be number 2 position. You don't have to put it because if you see propanone, you know it's 3 carbons, you know the carboxyl group has to be on the middle carbon. If it wasn't, it would be a ketone. Okay. So the propanone, no numbers necessary. And this is acetone, this paint thinner. Okay. So acetone is propanone. Okay. Now, here's another example. Okay. We have 4 carbons. 4 carbons, our longest chain is butane. It's a ketone because the carbonyl group is between 2 carbons. So we drop the E, add O-N-E. Okay. Do I have to put 2 butane, or can I just butanone, or can I just write butanone? Or do I have to put 2 butanone?
Just butanone.
Just butanone, perfect. Because if it's over on this carbon here, that's also 2 butanone. Okay, and if it's on this carbon, it's an aldehyde. This carbon's an aldehyde, and it's the exact same thing if I moved it over to here, because you get the lowest possible number. So you can put just butanone. Now, if you put the 2 butanone, I will not mark it wrong. Okay, because it is a 4 carbons ketone, a carbonyl group on the number 2 carbon, but you don't have to put it. Okay, no numbers necessary. If you want a common name, okay, you might see methyl ethyl ketone. Again, how it got that is this is the ketone right here. On one side, it's a methyl group. On the other side, it's an ethyl group, 1 carbon and 2 carbons. So sometimes you'll see methyl ethyl ketone as a common name for it. When you do it that way, the smaller alkyl group comes first. Methyl is smaller than ethyl. Methyl is 1 carbon, ethyl is 2 carbons. This one is not alphabetical order. Okay. All right. Someone give me the name of this thing, both the IUPAC name and a common name. So let's start with the IUPAC name. We're going to number the thing. How many carbons do we have? Count the carbons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 carbons. Are we going to number this thing left to right or right to left? Which way?
Right to left.
Right to left. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Okay. I'll give you, let's see. I'll give you about 30 seconds. You guys write down your name that you think it's going to be, and we'll compare notes. Give me the IUPAC name and the common name. We'll give you a little bit of time to think that through and write it down, and then we'll work through it. Oops, so I dropped my lid to my cup. Hitting down the chords. All right. All right, let's compare notes here. So I got 8 carbons. So 8 carbons is octane. Octane. Okay. So this is a ketone. The carbonyl group is between 2 carbons. So we drop the E, add O-N-E. Now, there's multiple carbons where this carbonyl group could be. What number is the carbonyl group at? It's at number 4. So this is 4-octanone. So you should have put 4-octan. Oh, dropping the E, put O and E. That's the IUPAC name. The common name, we have 2 groups attached. One has 3 carbons. One has 4 carbons. Okay. So you could also name this thing propyl, which is 3 carbons, butyl, which is 4 carbons, ketone. Okay, so I don't want to write because it'll get somewhere that. So it could be called propyl. Again, that's a smaller one. Another word, butyl and ketone. Propyl, butyl, ketone. So 2 ways to name this thing, IUPAC or common name. Okay, so again, 4-octanone, which is what we got. So 4-octanone is your IUPAC name. Common name is propyl, butyl, ketone. Because propyl has 3 carbons, butyl has 4 carbons, and it's a ketone in between a propyl group and a butyl group. And we put the smallest group first, which is the 3 carbons. Everybody get that? Anybody get something different? Should have got something different. We should have agreed with that one. All right, perfect. So IUPAC naming of ketones, which just we went over. Rules directly analogous to those of aldehydes. So in other words, it's the same thing as naming aldehydes. Only difference is you got to put the number where it's at usually, where the carbonyl carbon's at. You got to put the number, and you've got to tell me, drop the E, add O and E instead of AO. That's the differences. Longest chain with a carbonyl group, replace the E with O and E. Indicate the position of the carbonyl group with a number on the chain, giving the carbonyl group the lowest possible number, just like always. All right, so let's name this thing. We have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons, and we're going to number them from the right side to the left side to give the carbonyl group the lowest possible number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so 5 carbons is pentane. It's a ketone because the carbonyl group is between 2 carbons. So we drop the E, add O and E. Okay, and the carbonyl group is at the number 2 position. So 2-pentanone, and we got a substituent, an attachment. We have 4-chloro. Okay, so 4-chloro, 2-pentanone. Okay, so 4-chloro, 2-pentanone. Or if we want to name a common name, we have 2 groups that are attached. We have a methyl group and we have a propyl group. Okay, the methyl group's a smaller one. So we do methyl first, we would put methyl. And then the propyl group has a chlorine attached to it. Okay, so it would be 2, because this is the chloro, this is naming this individually 1, 2, 3 coming across from the carbonyl group. So it would be 2-chloro, propyl, ketone. Okay. So you could have 4-chloro, 2-pentanone, or you can have the methyl group and then the 2-chloro-propyl group, ketone. Okay, so methyl, because methyl comes first and it's all one word. Then 2-chloropropyl, because you have a chlorine group on the 3 carbons on the number 2 position, and then ketone. You name each side. Okay, with the small one coming first. So you could 4-chloro-2-pentanone is IUPAC, or the common name is methyl 2-chloropropyl ketone. Okay. 2 molecules associated with the aroma of blue cheese. They like cheese in this book, don't they? Cheddar cheese, now blue cheese. are the ketones shown below. Name these ketones using IUPAC nomenclature and the common name. All right, let's name this thing. This is one of the things that give blue cheese, its distinctive taste and smell. Again, how many total carbons in the longest chain, including the carbonyl group? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 7. 7 is heptane. So let's put heptane. And it is a ketone because a carbonyl group is between 2 carbons. So drop the E, add O-N-E. That's our ketone. And what position is it at? What number is our carbonyl group at?
2.
Number 2. So it's 2 heptanone. That's the IUPAC name. Common name. There's a group here, which is 1 carbon. There's a group here, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons on this side. So the smaller one is 1, which is supposed to be methyl. Okay. It's going to be 5, which is pentyl. And ketone. It's a ketone. Okay. So the IUPAC name is 2-heptanone. The common name is methyl pentyl ketone. So 2-heptanone or methyl pentyl ketone. Okay. And here's another one. Okay. How many total carbons do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's the 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 carbons. 9 is no name. Again, all single bonds, so no name. It's a ketone. Carbonyl group is between 2 carbons. Okay, so ketone, drop the E, add O-N-E, and at what number is the carbonyl carbon at in this one?
2.
2. Okay, you number left to right to give the carbonyl group the lowest possible number. So 2 known and owned. 2 known and owned. 2 known and 1 owned. 2 known and owned. That's how you say it. 2 known and owned. You don't have to pronounce them correctly for the test. That's okay. So that's 2 known and owned. Sounds like a musical name. All right. So we got the IUPAC name. What's the common name? We have on one side, we have 1 carbon, and the other side, I have 7 carbons. Okay. So we'd start with the smaller one. 1 carbon is methyl. 7 carbons is hexyl. And it is a ketone. Methyl hexyl ketone. There you go. 2 known and owned. Okay, or methyl heptyl. Why did I put hexyl? Hexyl is 6. I'm sorry. Hex is 6. Heptyl is 7. H-E-P. Sorry about that. Hexane is 6. Heptyl is 7. My mistake. See how easy it is to make mistakes in this stuff? Just always go back and double check your work, recount things, and check your numbers. It's easy to make a mistake like that. So methyl heptyl ketone. Okay. Okay, each of the following again, ketones. And always find the longest carbon chain, including the carbonyl group. So here's our longest carbon chain. Okay, the same either way, so it doesn't matter. And IUPAC name. We're going to have a number 1, a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 carbons. Okay, so 8 carbons is octane. Don't make mistakes with this one. Octane, and it's a ketone. Why is it a ketone? Because the carbonyl group is between 2 carbons. So drop the E, add O-N-E, and tell me where the carbonyl group is. And like you said, it's in the number 2 position. So this is 2-octanone. Now there's a substituent, there's an attachment here. At the number 6 carbon, we have a 2-carbon attachment. 2 carbons is ethyl. So we have 6-ethyl, 2, that's a dash, octanone. That's your IUPAC name. So 6-ethyl, 2-octanone. Now, the common name, we have 2 groups attached to it. One group is a methyl group. That's your smaller group. And then here is attachment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is hexyl. I'll get this right this time. And at number 4, we have an ethyl group. So it's methyl and then 4-ethyl hexyl ketone. Okay. So 6-ethyl 2-octanone, which we got, that's our IUPAC name. So attachment number 6, or methyl, attach it, or 4-ethyl hexyl ketone. Now, the one thing you have to realize in this is if you have a substituent group, we're not giving this the lowest possible number anymore. Okay, if we numbered it from left to right, in this section of the chain right here, we would number it left to right to give the lowest number. We don't do that. If we have a ketone, okay, when you count your carbons, you always start from the adjacent to the carbonyl group. So this is always going to be number 1. And then 2, when you're naming for your common groups. That's why this is 4, this is methyl, 4-ethyl hexyl ketone. Okay, that makes sense? Whenever you can do these common names, if you have a substituent, you always start your numbering next to the carbonyl carbon. That's where you put your number 1 and then label it across. So it branches off from that carbonyl group. Okay, so this is going to be the lowest carbon number, number 1. Even though substituent group is going to be at number 4 this way instead of number 3. Everybody see the difference? You're numbering it so it's the lowest number. You're starting your numbering from the carbonyl group, from the adjacent to the carbonyl group. So you got 6-ethyl 2-octanone, and you have methyl 4-ethyl hexyl ketone. So everything's numbered from the carbonyl group outwards. So let's do that again. So we have got how many carbons in our longest chain? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 carbons is hexane. It is a ketone because there's a carbonyl group between 2 carbons. So we drop the E, add O-N-E. So it's hexanone. What number is the carbonyl group at in my chain? Who can tell me?
3.
3, perfect. 3, hexanone. And we have an attachment. We have an attachment of this methyl group right here at the number 2 carbon. So the IUPAC name would be 2-methyl 3-hexanone. That tells me it's a ketone with 6 carbons with the carbonyl group at number 3. And at the number 2 carbon, there's a methyl group. Okay. Now the common name. Common name, we're going to name the attachments. This is 2 carbons. This is 3 carbons. 2 carbons is an ethyl group. Okay, so that would come first. And our attachments, so this is ethyl. And what's attached to it? We have a methyl group. So what number is that methyl group attached to? What number carbon?
2.
Not 2. Remember, you start numbering from the carbonyl carbon. So this is number 1. This is number 1. This is number 2. This is number 2. We start numbering from the carbonyl carbon and go outwards. Okay. So it's not a regular numbering system. So this is 1-methyl ethyl. 1-methyl ethyl. Okay. And on the other side, it's propyl. Ketone. So this is 2-methyl-3-hexanone, or the common name is 1-methyl ethyl, because there's a methyl group at number 1, and this is ethyl right here. So 1-methyl ethyl propyl, 3 carbons, ketone. Okay. So 2-methyl-3-hexanone, that's our IUPAC name. And then 1-methyl ethyl propyl ketone. Keep getting different colors on this thing for some reason. All right. So go back and double check everything. Working backwards, we have an ONE, means a ketone. AN is single bonds. Hexane is 6. 3 means the carbonyl group's at the number 3 position. So we have 6 carbons. At the third one, there's a carbonyl group. The all single bonds, and it's a ketone. And then the number 2 position, we have a methyl group attached. Or we can break it down to 1-methyl ethyl, which means, again, working backwards, you have an ethyl group, which is 2 carbons. At the number 1 position, we have a methyl group attached. And this is the other side of it is a propyl group of the carbonyl group here, the other side of it here. And it is a ketone. So the key to remember this thing is from the carbonyl group, we count from the carbonyl group this way, and we count this way. We count away from the group, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Okay. And okay. Let's pick this one. How many carbons do we have total? We have 5 carbons. 5 carbons is pentane. Okay, we have a carbonyl group, so we know it's a ketone. There's carbons on both sides of the carbonyl group. So drop the E, add O and an E. Oh. All right. Now, what number is our carbonyl group at? It's at number 3. It's at the number 3 carbon. So 1, 2, 3. We name it, it's symmetrical, so either way we number it. Okay. At number 2 and at number 4, we have 2 methyl groups. So 2,4-dimethyl. So to name this thing, we put 2,4-dimethyl, 3-pentanone. It's a ketone, 5 carbons, 3 positions. There's a carbonyl group. At 2 and 4, there are 2 methyl groups. That's it. 2,4-dimethyl, 3-pentanone. Okay, common name. Again, we're going to count from the carbonyl group outwards. So this becomes, let me get a different color. This becomes number 1. This becomes number 2. This becomes number 1. That becomes number 2. Okay, so you have 2 carbons on both sides, which is an ethyl group. And at number 1, there's a methyl group attached. So the attachment is 1-methyl ethyl. Okay, so there's a methyl group right here at the number 1 carbon. And there's two of those. So it's di. 1-methyl ethyl. There's a line in between there. Or you put methyl, 1-methyl ethyl, 1-methyl ethyl, but just put di, 1-methyl ethyl ketone. That's the common name. Okay. So 2,4-dimethyl-3-pentanone. Okay. Or di, 1-methyl ethyl ketone. There's two 1-methyl ethyl groups, or diisopropyl. These are isopropyl groups also. You can name it as isopropyl, or you can name it as 1-methyl ethyl. If you recognize that as an isopropyl, you put diisopropyl ketone, or di 1-methyl ethyl ketone. Okay, making sense?
Yeah.
Was that?
Yeah.
Question? Oh, it's making sense. Okay, good. So common names of ketones. Again, you have the common names from the Greek letters. Again, you do the same thing. Okay, alkyl groups are prefixes 2 words followed by the word ketone. That's what we just got done doing. Are the common names. You order the alkyl groups in the name. Okay, alphabetical or size smaller to larger. Usually it's smaller to larger. Some people usually put them alphabetical. Okay, so our common name, which we said with this would be, again, we've already been doing this. This would be a methyl group and an ethyl group. So we'd have methyl, ethyl, ketone, or butanone. That's the IUPAC name. Okay, so methyl, ethyl, ketone. That's smaller to larger. Put the 2 groups and then the ketone. Okay, this one here. Okay, who wants to guess at the IUPAC name is propanone. 3 carbons, O and E ending, propanone, all single bonds. What's the common name? Starts with di, because there's 2 of the same group. So what would the common name be?
Dimethyl ketone.
Perfect, exactly right. Dimethyl ketone. There's 2 methyl groups. So dimethyl ketone. Okay, let's do a couple more, then we'll call it a night. It's been a lot of information so far. Name the ketones represented by the following condensed formulas using IUPAC and common names. Let's do a couple of these, and we'll call it quits for the night. All right, so how many carbons?
5.
5 carbons. So it is
And
pentane. Perfect. And it's a ketone because our carbonyl group is between 2 carbons. So we drop the E and add O and E. And we see what number it's at. It's at the number 2 position. So our IUPAC name is 2-pentaneone. Common name. We have a group here on the right side, a group here on the left side. Okay. The smaller group is the number 1 group on the right-hand side. There's only 1 carbon, and that's methyl. That's 1 word. And then there's 3 carbons on the left to the carbonyl group. Now remember, we're not counting this carbon when we're doing the common names. We're just taking the groups to both sides of it. That's included in the name ketone. So methyl, and then 3 carbons is propyl. Methyl, propyl, ketone. Okay, so 2-pentanone is our IUPAC name. Methyl propyl ketone. Where's methyl propyl ketone? There it is. Methyl propyl ketone is a common name. All right, last one. Then we'll call it quits for the night. You guys have had a lot tonight. All right. So we know this is a ketone. How do we know this is a ketone?
because because there's
Because the carbonyl group is in between two carbons.
You got it. Perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. The carbonyl group is between two carbons. So the total number of carbons for the IUPAC name is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 carbons. 8 carbons is octane. It's a ketone because, just like you said before, it's a carbonyl group between two carbons. You drop the E, add ONE for your ketone. And then you tell the number where it's at. It's at number 3, giving the carbonyl group the lowest possible number. So 3-octanone is your IUPAC name. Common name. Let's do blue. Common name. You have an attachment to the left and an attachment to the right. There are 2 carbons on the left. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons on the right. Okay. The smallest one is 2, and that's ethyl. 2 is ethyl. So let's put ethyl. Okay. Second one is 5 carbons. 5 carbon is pentyl. And this is a ketone. Okay. So this is 3-octanone, which is your IUPAC name, or ethyl pentyl ketone, which is the common name. 3-octanone as your IUPAC, or ethyl pentyl ketone as a common name.